Hello, folks. Welcome back to the Two Stewards Show. If you're coming back, my name is Mark, and I'm here with Brent.
Hello, folks. And I'm nice and close to the mic for you, Mark.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to, tape your face to the mic. It's important to have good mic technique.
Oh, man.
All right. So what a topsy-turvy world we live in, Brent, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't know. Every time I look at the news, I'm like, is this reality, TV show? What's going on?
Just stop looking at the news.
I do, and then I come here, and you're like, no, Brent, you really got to follow the news.
Yeah,
like,
you gotta...
You see this? Did you know that a guy got shot? Turns out it's Trump. I'm like, what?
Yeah, there's a few things going on. But yeah, it is interesting. The news, we were just saying that with Gideon, seems so disconnected from actual daily life.
Yeah.
Right? And so what, is it just a narrative that people are putting out there? Is it, I think it's part of the need to be entertained too, right? That the regular daily stuff, oh yeah, my kid hit a milestone today. That doesn't make it to the news because who cares, right? But those are the things that are really important in people's lives.
Yeah.
So, but there's so much going on, and we talk about it on episodes fairly regularly, right? But there just seems to be so much instability right now, and then you sit back and you're like, is that, is it really is everything really that bad, or is this just the news hyping it up or whatever? But I think we are in a period of great instability right now.
Yeah, crisis.
Yeah.
And then on the show, we've been talking about real estate a little bit. We've been talking about Bitcoin, the monetary system, different family values and all these things. And then, I think maybe this show we want to try and loop some of them together.
Yeah.
They're all kind of dovetail together in one way or another. Shine a little bit of a Christian perspective on it too. But
yeah, for sure. So we were just talking about this, and
where's the special guest we got to have on, the expert guy who we just sit back and ask him questions.
Well, listen, Brent, in life, there's not always an expert or a special guest that you can
turn to.
You can bring on to. Well, I mean, they're sort. I guess maybe that's our point. There kind of is for us, right? And this is one of the things we were talking about, that people are anxious, depressed, don't know where to turn, right? Even if things are going maybe well for them in life, they look at the world and oh man, I don't know what's going on.
What about my kids? Where are they going to grow up in this world? Yeah.
Exactly, right? And so we have that answer. We have that expert, right? We have the Bible to guide us. We have Jesus. We have that comfort and that hope that we can turn to, but not everybody does. But I think in that lens, we want to kind of look at and maybe just re-examine. We talked about this book. We did a review. I can't remember what episode, right?
Yeah.
The Fourth Turning.
I don't know where my book went, but it was on the shelf. The Fourth Turning, and I forget who it's by. William Strauss and Neil Howe.
Yeah. And so interesting book. And so it's about the cycles of history, right? They divide it into seculum. And there's different theories on the cycles of history, but I kind of like this one.
Seculum is a big word for
an age.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, in their interpretation of it. Don't want to get into the Latin etymology too much here, right? But they've got they divide history, Western history anyways, into periods, and those periods have sub-periods within them. And so, what were the four sub categories, Brent?
Yeah. So the 4 periods. I'm gonna pull this up for a second here. So they last about 20-25 years, and it starts with the high, and then you have the awakening, and then the unraveling, and then the crisis. So interesting way to break it down, but they're generational cycles, right? So it's kind of based on, a new generation comes in, they might be raised in a different context, they might have different values, they might have different opportunities, and now all of a sudden culture changes slowly, and then the next generation comes along and there's another shift, right?
Yeah.
This is a book, I guess, trying to put make some sense out of what's going on, and I guess try to make some predictions about what's going to happen as well. If this continues to, be a cycle year after year, generation after generation. Where are we in this cycle, and what will happen next? And it's interesting because I think before the show you're saying, well, we're actually aligning pretty close with the crisis cycle.
Yeah.
And it feels like it, right?
Absolutely. So, yeah.
Usually in a crisis, somebody starts a podcast and there's a big revival and everybody kind of just joins the movement. And
yeah. Okay, so I guess we're part of the, I don't know, are we part of the problem or part of the solution?
I don't know. We're getting to the high, I think, right? Yeah. The high is it?
Well, we got to go through the crisis first.
Okay.
And
that's
one of the interesting points is that through that crisis period, there's always a resolution one way or another, but it's not always for the good. It can be for the bad, and there have been examples of that. And so that's the question. If you kind of buy all this, and we're going to go through the last seculum, I guess, and just try and prove the point that this is kind of what's happening where we are, and then how do we come through this? Is it going to be a good period or a bad period?
Well, maybe for listeners, let's try and describe a little bit about our thoughts on each one of these cycles, like the high. What is the high period like, and when in history was that, just for listeners who...
Well, I mean, you could go back a cycle before that too, right? And you can go to sort of the end of the Civil War, which was a crisis period in the States. And then, go through that. You had Reconstruction, which would be part of the high and really the coalescence of the United States as a force, right? You've got the awakening, the unraveling, and then you come into like the 20s and 30s.
Which was a crisis point? Yeah.
So the 1900s, like the Gilded Age, right? That would have been part of the unraveling. It was part of the, preeminence of America, but also you could see things unraveling. And then that really took place in the 20s with financial, and often finances are tied into this. Financial crisis, right?
Yeah.
Stock market crash, the Great Depression.
There's some economic distress that's going on.
Yeah.
People are feeling there needs to be a change.
Yeah, and it's interesting how that there always seems to be the economic element tied into it. It's not always just social or cultural. They always go hand in hand. So that kind of sets the stage. You've got the crisis in the 30s, and then World War II
so that's
comes
like
up.
The Great Depression.
Yeah.
World War II.
Yeah, World War II starts, and you had, World War I was in that unraveling period and maybe the beginning of the crisis period for the world, but especially in the West. And then you've got the 40s where... Yeah, there's a crisis, but there's also a culmination of that crisis, right? Where the United States enters the war, and the simplistic history is like, U.S. enters the war and they win the war, right? We know that's not really the case.
Mark summed up all the history books in 2 sentences. There was a war. They won the war. I think that's in the U.S. Kids textbooks too. There was a war and we won it.
That's what they would have.
All right, kids, memorize that. We won the war.
But it was the start of, and not all these periods are like distinct, like this 25-year period is completely separated from the other one.
Because if it was, we would be like, making financial decisions based, hey, next year it's going to be the high period, Mark. So you want to get in on that.
You always have the seeds of one period building into the next one. So you see, the U.S. with their immense manufacturing power, and, that was sort of, that coalesced during the war because you had all these industries come together to support the war effort, and then you had, like, massive industry, right, that was ready to go on to the next thing. And all the technological achievements in the war and advances helped fuel American industry. So then you go through the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, I think, would sort of be the high period, right? And, some of the features of that would be nuclear family. Yeah,
like stability in politics, in family life, culture, maybe some unity as well.
Yeah, a lot of church attendance. Church attendance was at a high, right? There was almost...
like institutions are stable.
Yeah, well, in the 30s already, you saw some of the revivals happening on the religious front, right?
Yeah,
These
I wasn't
big tent
around,
revivals.
but you must have had. You got some good pictures of them on your phone.
I sold a lot of the fabric for the tents, actually. So it was a good time for me. But no, you could see the revival was starting to happen even before that high period, right?
Yeah.
Through the crisis. And then, that happened in the 40s. So you have this picture of sort of suburban America where, there's a chicken in every pot and every family's got a station wagon and on Sundays they go to church.
Yeah.
And, you can see like that wasn't perfect.
It almost seems a bit mundane, but it's also like that's where the American dream comes out of too, right? Like everyone wants a house and a car and a family and a job and to have their own thing, right? Like you work, mom stays home, takes care of a big family. We run around the yard.
Yeah. And I mean, it wasn't perfect and none of these periods are perfect, right? You still had strong segregation in the United States, for example, right? And, you had, a lot of vets with trauma and issues, right?
Yeah.
But, nonetheless, in general, this was sort of a high period in the West anyways, right? There's Reconstruction in Europe as well. I mean, there was it was different in Europe because you had a lot of poverty and like we think of Holland where our families come from, right? In the 50s, it was terrible, right? Everybody had to leave to seek new opportunities. But that was part of this, part of the contribution to Canada, the United States growing.
What about economically? So at the end of the war, they do the Bretton Woods, and well, I'm just thinking about this in the context of these cycles, maybe to paint a picture like the high period and the awakening. Then the unraveling happens later on, and if you paint it over like the 20s, 30s, and then the 40s, 50s, 60s, and then you have the awakening maybe in the 60s, 70s, and that's when they uncoupled the gold standard. So you before that you had a little bit maybe more stability economically.
Yeah, I mean for the States especially, right, with Bretton Woods, like that was great because they got all the gold.
Yeah. So people don't know what this is. Like, go back and listen to some episodes from the beginning of our
Basically,
show.
During the war, the U.S. held a lot of gold for countries.
Yeah.
And then after that...
And gold, by the way, is money for people who...
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So because America was safe, so you keep your gold there. And then after the end of the war, they're like, hey, guys, we'll just hang on to all this.
Yeah.
And we'll issue dollars.
Yeah.
And, it's the same thing. It's good.
Yeah, you can come back anytime and change these dollars into gold.
They're always convertible, and eventually that went by the wayside because they issued more dollars than they had gold. But we don't have to get into that. But I do want to point out one thing that's sort of behind happening, sort of behind the scenes, I guess you could say. So there's a book out.
Do you actually read books, Mark?
No, but I read the summaries. Okay. I have not read this book, but I've listened to the author talk about it. So it's called Why the West Can't Win by Fadi Lama. And there's what's the subtitle? Oh, From Bretton Woods to a Multipolar World. And so he kind of traces this, the ascendancy of the U.S. and now to a point where it's not just the U.S. that is the empire. And we think in terms of empires as well, or at least I do.
Yeah, you're walking around like there's an empire over there.
Yeah, I was thinking about the Roman Empire, right? Could I wear a toga and sandals? Maybe some gladiator armor. But anyways, if you ever listen to the rest of this history, which is a great history podcast, like the one I think it's Tom Holland. He's like, I think about the Roman Empire far more than is healthier than I should, right? Like every day at least I think about it. And anyways, but yeah, we think in terms of empires. So you got the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
You've got the Turkish Empire. You've got different empires all throughout the world. Yeah, Persian. You've got
Spain.
More recent history: Spain, Portugal, Holland, England, right?
Yeah.
So the author's contention in this book, just to put a point to it a little bit, is that behind all these empires is really another empire, and that's the empire of money. And that is the people and the families that really control what's going on. So that's interesting to keep in the back of your mind as you look at these different ages of history.
Yeah.
Does that really change? And, what's our view on that? And, he kind of goes back to Venice.
Is this anything to do with conspiracy, sort of?
Oh, yeah, tons
Yeah,
of conspiracy stuff. But it's not like some people will say, oh, well, it's the Rothschilds and it's whoever,
Yeah,
right?
the Rockefeller or whatever. Yeah.
Well, and usually it goes back to the Jews.
Yeah.
And it's a Jewish or a Zionist conspiracy. And this guy doesn't go there. He says it's not, it's not ethnic, it's not racial, it's not along country lines, whatever. It's just whoever happens to hold money holds power. And once you have a certain amount of money, like all your needs are met and you can do anything you want. What's left? Well, the only thing left is power. So
pursue power.
So he's saying that, basically there is sort of this shadowy cabal of people, groups that really influence, even through empires and through the different stages of history, that really is the force behind it. So it's a sort of a depressing way to think about it, but I kind of buy it.
Sounds like we're going to have to read this book on the show.
I kind of buy it because I guess the idea is...
What's interesting is that when Bretton Woods happened,
Yep.
we're going way off top, but when Bretton Woods happened,
what a shock.
like, who would have predicted that? Like, gold is the standard on which the world operates, and now all of a sudden the U.S. government is like, okay, well, the most powerful, maybe they're the biggest economy or whatever, and they're like untouched by the war. So they can kind of call the shots, and by the way, we're going to determine what money is. Like, that's a pretty bold statement to make. I don't know where else in history that happens on a global scale.
Oh, the Roman Empire?
Like the Roman Empire.
Persian Empire?
Yeah, this
Every
is the
empire.
currency we use. Yeah, they try to impose it, right?
Yeah.
But to this scale, especially in a modern context where we have digital currencies, like,
Well,
it's
I mean,
crazy.
So going back to Bretton Woods, I'm sure people are falling asleep by now.
Yeah.
But there was a big debate
Gideon's falling asleep
about
again.
what the reserve currency of the world would be.
Yeah.
Is it going to be pounds, English pounds, or was it going to be the US dollar? And this was like a real divergence because it was English pounds for the whole world, like literally for the whole world for a long time, right? The British Empire. And so switching over to US dollars, wow, that was quite a thing. So, I would say there was probably more people behind this than just the US government, flexing their muscles.
Yeah.
And it was probably this sort of empire of money. So anyways, that's behind the scenes in all
Yeah,
this.
because we're trying to go through the different cycles in the fourth turning to kind of understand, I don't know.
Yes.
So the high, the awakening, the unraveling, the crisis.
Sure. So the high in the 40s and 50s. So we have a religious revival, a cultural revival in the States, and we'll kind of stick to the States, I think, because it's a pretty good proxy for Canada as well. But you have like national pride, right? Like, hey, we're a country. We just came through this. Look what we did. Canada as well, right? We had sent troops and we were victorious, and we had a lot of national pride.
There was just about 10 of us running around.
Saying a boot.
So, and then the awakening is...
So the awakening you see in the 60s.
It's always an
and
interesting
70s.
period, I guess, where there is prosperity. Maybe you have a little bit more free time. People are idle. People are academically searching. People are looking for what's new, what's cool.
Yeah. Well,
Right?
you have like standardized work weeks now. You have the idea of the 40, 45, or the 8-hour work day, right?
Yeah.
As an example.
9
So
to
it's not
5.
just like slave all of your life and be happy.
Yeah.
Right. So this immense prosperity in the U.S., the rise of the middle class. And what happens when you get too much time on your hands, right?
You become woke. That's the awakening.
Well, and I mean, people, I guess there's good and bad in each period, right? Because you had people campaigning for civil rights. And I think we would all agree that was a good thing, right? Let's end segregation, these Jim Crow laws. And that happened in the 60s and 70s. But in parallel with that, you had the sexual revolution, the awakening of, people's, sexual being. And and with that, the degradation of marriage, right? 40s,
Yeah.
50s. And I mean, you still have a parallel stream of people who very much support the family.
Yeah.
And, this was a fringe. This wasn't all of society just
It's
turned.
like spiritual revival almost. Like,
Yeah,
some
maybe
new
a pagan
thing.
or a self-realized religion.
self-discovery. Yeah.
Yeah, self-actualization.
Yeah.
Right? You have...
We're throwing out all the big words. Individualism.
Well, people talk about self-actualization like this is a good thing, and I would say like it's not. It's just narcissism and egotism. Well, because you also have the rise of psychiatry as like a really important thing, and yeah, that's a whole other topic, I guess. But I would argue that modern psychiatry has done nothing for the modern world, and maybe possibly made it worse.
Yeah,
that's a big statement to make, but this was part of this period, right?
These are
social
things that
sciences.
these authors have just observed, right? And
Yeah.
I almost pin this to it. It happens that the authors are observing this, but they're really observing just like the trends in human depravity and our human nature goes through these cycles, right? Like if you grow up in a context where things are tough and difficult for you, you rely on others more. Okay, well, what does that lead to? Well, maybe more stable institutions and families and that sort of thing, right? And then if you grow up in stable institutions, well, maybe you're looking for the arts and cultural flourishing and all these different
You're not
things,
focused on survival.
Yeah.
Right? You have time to
focus
think
on
about other
yourself
stuff.
and pursuing.
And you could have an arts revival.
Yeah. And that's not a bad thing, but it leads to phase 3, which is the unraveling.
Yeah.
So,
and I mean, with all this, we can go back to Ecclesiastes, right? And like, there is nothing new under the sun, and that is so true. And this is part of the reason I like the fourth turning in the book, is that it aligns. It's not a Christian book, but it aligns with, again, that sort of cyclical view of history, where we just are doomed to repeat the same, like Sisyphus rolling the rock up the hill, doomed to repeat the same thing over and over again.
Which is not a common method of describing history that you would hear.
Yeah, we tend, the humanist view is that it's progressive. We're always climbing to a new peak. Yeah. We're always at the edge of disaster.
Clear evidence that we're progressing, Mark. Like, just look around.
Look.
We've talked about that on a few minutes. Okay.
No. What's
the unraveling? What's happening?
Do you identify as any kind of animal, by the way, Brent? Or maybe a wolf or a dragon? Yeah. I'm dragon kind. This is a thing, right? What's your stereotype? It's not somebody with a lisp. Thing with your stereotype. No, stereotype.
This is
for people who identify as animals, and they're dead serious, right? Again, it's a mental illness, and modern psychiatry just plays into it. Like, that's your truth.
So this is your description of the unraveling,
this is unraveling into crisis. We're in full blown crisis now.
Yeah.
Right?
That makes sense.
You talked about truth before, right?
Yeah.
Where is truth in all of this? So in the sort of the high period, right, we were in sort of a modern time, but there was still absolute truth.
Yeah.
It existed, and there was with religious revival, people are like, yes, there's truth. It's Jesus. Come to him. And then the awakening in the 60s, we saw a shift, right? We now start to see postmodernism. Yeah. And you can argue with me about, like, when did postmodernism start? But
I'm not going to argue with you on that.
Okay. One could. If one wanted to.
Call into the show if you'd like to argue with Mark.
That's the nice thing about recording this with just us. Nobody can argue with us. And you see that sort of furthering, of postmodernism, relativism in the unraveling period to now we're in a post-truth period. So you just see that progression.
Yeah.
And that just happens again and again and again in human history.
Yeah.
But we're at the unraveling. So now
the
we're
weakening
like in
of
the
institutions,
80s, the 90s.
Yeah, weakening of institutions and fragmentation of societal unity.
Okay, you're reading that, aren't you?
I'm reading that.
Yeah, okay.
Because this is like the truth right here. Right out of the pages of the ChatGPT.
Oh, is this a summary of the summary of the book? Yeah, Brent's cheating, everyone.
I'm cheating live on the show.
And we're using AI. See, this is part of the crisis, Brent. You're putting some person
I'm
out
trying
of
to
work.
be a living example of what's going on.
But yeah, so 80s, 90s, the unraveling. We see political correctness taking hold,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And again, that was, some of this was rooted in anti-racism work, which, on one level is a good thing. But then you can just see how it expanded, right? You have the backdrop as well in the 60s and the 70s of the Stonewall riots. So that's sort of the awakening of the gay movement and their political activism,
But
right?
it's still far from the norm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? It's not embedded into institutions. It's not embedded into society, into like...
No, but it's the planted the seed. So you see, like by the 90s, all of a sudden, like, there's, why is there discrimination against gay people?
So like all this
calling
stuff
for
you've
gay
seen,
marriage.
I came around in the 90s, and that's just what I know.
Yeah.
So you've kind of seen every step as we've gone through. And
You may be overstating it a little bit, but yes.
What's interesting is they follow this line of like individualism, right? So like in the high period, like there isn't really a focus on individual. It's more family values, communal goals versus the individual.
Well, you have that famous picture of Rosie the Riveter. I don't know if you ever.
It's not that famous if I haven't seen it. Yeah.
Why do we even talk to you? I don't know. Look it up, okay? So this is this woman atop a steel girder, clenching her fist, kind of like someone you know.
I've seen that before.
Yeah, okay, everybody's seen it. You don't know the name. She's got a bandana on, I think, a red bandana, right? And this is a woman who came into the workforce during the war for the good of country, right? So that idea that everybody comes together for the country. She put down her normal role as a caregiver in the family and went to work. And you can even see the seeds of
self-sacrifice for so whereas in the awakening period it's kind of this change in the emphasis on individual versus the collective. It's a funny
well, there's people misuse the collective can be powerful and important, especially when you're talking about family units, right? Even with the nuclear family, that the idea of the nuclear family, which is just mom, dad, and a couple kids, is more of an individualistic view of family than sort of the clan or the extended family, which is the collective, right? Where you have aunts, uncles, grandparents, collective wisdom. People could help raise children as well in that group, right? We've moved away from that, even in the sort of this quote-unquote high period.
Yeah, so you hit the unraveling stage and individualism just further intensifies. You end up with more and more focus on...
Yeah, just do it, right? You got... who is that? Is that Nike or Reebok?
Nike.
Yeah.
I don't know what Reebok is. Just try to do it, but probably get some Nikes on because they're way better. Oh, man, I'm probably going to get fired from marketing at Reebok.
There goes your endorsement deal.
This culture of personal responsibility, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And you see a, decline in church attendance as well. Not that church attendance is like the marker of
morality and society.
Stuff, but it is an interesting way to kind of track what's happening in society, right?
If people value church attendance and they actually go, well, what does that say about the things they're sacrificing on that day?
Yeah. And you see the further breakdown of the family, particularly in urban areas.
Yeah.
And in certain demographics as well, where fatherlessness is starting to become the norm, or at least a problem. And there is a divide almost as well between sort of rural and urban America in this.
Yeah. So now we get to...
But divorce rates also are, at this period are climbing, right? So
unraveling.
It's like that sweater with a thread that you pick and now you're pulling and like it's starting, the whole sweater's starting to come apart.
This goes.
That was also
discos.
A terrible period in the history of the West. I will just say that right now. The whole disco movement, like what a terrible, the clothes, the music, everything. It was not. It was not.
I'll have to take your word for that because I wasn't around in that.
Just listen to some. Just listen to a bit, and you're like, "Wow, this wasn't just. They didn't just use this for commercials for 30 seconds. Like people listened to this.
Yeah, this is
went out and danced."
So, anyways, disco, stewardship, it's all connected. But yeah, they're throwing out all of the norms. They're throwing out everything. And then, so now we get to the crisis, because this is where we're at. And so is this going to help us to describe what's going on? Like, do we even agree with this whole fourth turning framework? Like, I think we kind of like the cyclical nature of it. I'm just trying to say, like, we're not putting this forward as like, this is the truth. There's just interesting lens to look through to see what's going on.
You have to stand for truth, Brent. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
No, I do like it as a, I think it's a pretty good framework to look at things from.
Yeah.
And we've said this, but there's Elliott waves, which people use primarily in the financial world. There's, I can't remember there's a Russian fella as well, who, there's a few different theories about the different cycles of history, but they're all kind of the same. Like, it's like that saying, right? Hard times make good men make good times make soft men,
and soft men make confused sayings.
Yeah. That's the one. I think I mangled that, but it's the same idea that,
Right.
The prosperity and
exactly. Yeah. One thing leads to the next. Next thing you know, the two stewards come out of the woodwork, and we're into a period of economic distress, profound change, and political instability.
Ladies and gentlemen, Joe Biden.
Yeah, but that's a good picture of the chaos that's going on, right? In a period of crisis, like your leader, the leader of like the free world, I don't even know if it's free anymore, the most powerful country in the world, like can't walk up a flight of stairs. I don't know, like, is that...
It's a picture of the instability, right? Yeah. Obviously, he's not in charge. So who is, right?
So crisis... you can almost despair in the face of a crisis, right? You can say like, oh, all the previous things that happened, will now be no more, right?
Yeah.
Or you can be optimistic in a crisis and say, well, this means that all of the evils will be rooted out and a new stability will emerge with a greater passion, and that will become the new norm, and that will be...
It could be, but there's also been periods where that change has been for bad.
Right.
And all the bad stuff was cemented as the new cultural legacy. And
we go through
the awakening
low
and unraveling happened in reverse,
right?
Where it was positive cultural value. So, yeah, that's...
So buckle up, people. Either you're in store for a really nice high period in the next 20 years, or you're in store for 60 years of slogging.
There are arguments on both sides, right? So, like, looking at the transition from unraveling into crisis, I think starts around 2008 in the West, anyways, with the great financial crisis. And again, this is the economic component of it, right? We're starting to see the end of this debt super cycle, and part of that, there was like a warning bell in 2008, like, hey, things are really loosey-goosey and not good.
Yeah.
And here's what could happen. And then we're like, oh, it's fine. We printed. Well, that's when money printing began.
Well, it's because the government can control the warning bell, and they're like, "Oh, the warning bell is going off." Somebody put put your hand on that.
Like there's still the motion is still
it's
happening.
Going. It's just this guy's hands getting stuck in between the bell,
and eventually his fingers are going to get sore, and he's going to let go.
Yeah.
And but no, we're seeing like just record and just ridiculous amounts of debt. In the system, right? $1 trillion every 100 days is added to the U.S. national debt. $1 trillion,
which is funny. Like when an economic crisis happens and it's stifled by a government who can control the policy, like the monetary policy, it's not long before that crisis has to blow out somewhere else, right? Like, if you try and stifle one thing, it's just gonna pop out, right? And maybe this is the example of weight gain, right? Like, your shirt gets tighter, and eventually you have to go from a small to a medium.
I was thinking more of a diaper. Like, you got to change that diaper eventually, because it's going to blow out the back or the front or whatever, right? And then
like, there's got to be a release valve, right? Yeah. Where all of a sudden, prices go up.
Yeah.
And then they have to, take on more debt, and then they have to take on more debt, and eventually something has to give, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and so what are some of the...
Well, even the impact of prices going up is what we talk about all the time, inflation, right? Like if all of a sudden prices jump, Well, now that impacts people in a real way because they can't afford the same lifestyle. So like the escape valve is like all of a sudden, oh crap, I gotta, live in a half the size of the house that I want to live in. Oh,
well, or I don't have a house anymore,
Yeah.
right? We're looking at record amounts of homelessness
yeah.
in cities across Canada.
But I would say that trickles all the way up, right? Like, every kind of
It
tier.
trickles up to a certain tier.
Yeah. And
I think if you're
and
sort
then
of
you
in
control
that
the money
elite,
printing, and then you can afford whatever you want.
yeah, then you're not worried about it. But from the middle class on down, absolutely. So yeah, like inflation, the prices of living, everything is becoming like it's hard. And we've seen house prices. We're in real estate, so we look at house prices. They've come down significantly from the highs. But I mean, look at the backdrop. I just alluded to the U.S. debt, Canadian debt, right? We have a $40 billion deficit.
Yeah.
This is not a responsible government plan. There's no new housing being built. We have record amounts still of people coming into this country.
Yeah, you just mentioned a statistic or something of, was it employment or was it immigration?
Yeah, where'd it go? The first 5 months anyways of 2024, we've had, what was it? Over 350,000 something temporary foreign worker permit holders.
I'm going to take
IMP.
that statement with a lot of confidence.
No, I can't remember what it was. It worked out to, if we annualize it, that would be 873,000 people here on temporary work permits and other work permits, study permits and stuff, which is a record number.
Yeah.
We've been told that the number's going down. They're making all kinds of noise. It's not still high. It's still growing.
Right.
Right? It's still anyways. So that's part of the backdrop, right? We still have record immigration, housing starts we've talked about it, they're just getting worse every week. Housing starts are worse. So yeah, we're seeing a reprieve in house prices. It's only going to go one way in the next little while, barring a major revaluation of the currency. But either way, this law of supply and demand means that houses are going to be scarce. Housing quarters are going to be scarce, and it's going to be hard for a lot of people.
And they're still necessary.
I mean, we're looking at the UK, all these riots, right? You've got growing demands for Sharia law in England.
Yeah.
Right? Sort of the people this is the cradle of civilization, or it's overdone a little bit. And democracy and everything else.
And there goes another bus on fire.
Yeah, but mass immigration, and you have in urban centers anyways, huge Muslim, and not just, peaceful Muslims going about their day, but very active Muslim populations that want Sharia law in England, in the UK. And people are it's overdone. I listened to Tommy Robinson on Jordan Peterson the other day, right? And this guy was vilified for many years as being a racist, as being far-right extremist. And that's still how they paint him, right? If you listen to the news. But he was just telling the truth about what was happening with grooming gangs in England. And these were, it was all, I hate to say it because I'll be oh, you're a racist. But it was basically, Muslim immigrants who were working hand in hand with criminal gangs to groom young girls, underage girls, and then assaulting them. And this is a huge problem in the UK.
Oh, man.
And anyways, this guy was thrown in jail just for reporting on it, basically. And he was warning about a lot of things, and these things are happening now, right? It's you may say, hey, you're a Muslim hater, you're this, you're that, you're inciting hatred. No, I'm not. We're in the West. We have democracy as our form of government. If we want to change that, we can.
Yeah.
But I certainly don't want to live under Sharia law.
Well, it comes to Canada as well, because you were talking about we were talking about Generation Squeeze last time, right? With what Trudeau was on the show trying to talk, and he's like you were saying, pitting young people against old people.
Yeah.
So kind of creating factions in society that maybe they exist, but he's trying to exaggerate them and get on one side to get some support from them, and make them the evil one, so to speak.
Well, I thought he would just give up and be like, okay, everybody hates me, I'm going to step down. But he's doubling down. Absolutely. Go on.
Oh, yeah.
The young versus old.
Yeah. So, and then, man, that just sparked all kinds of things. Because if you read different books, you're like, oh man, the young people in 1984 in George Orwell's book. And so I bumped into somebody the other day who hasn't read this book, and I'm like, man, you got to read this book. Like, what's going on? Yeah, it's like, it's happening, people. What do you?
Well, again, yeah, history repeats itself. Nothing new under the sun. So, Cultural Revolution in China, right, with Mao,
Yeah.
right? They had the four olds.
This is where all conspiracy theories start, is right here on the show? Or?
No, we just perpetuate them.
Okay. Okay.
No, okay, but this is fact, right?
Okay, fact.
Just reading it from Wikipedia, the four olds were old ideas, old culture, old customs, and old habits.
So when was Mao? Like what year?
So this is 60s.
60s, okay.
Right?
Yeah.
We had like hippies over here and then people just slaughtering millions over there.
Yeah.
Slightly worse in China.
In Russia too.
Well, that was long before,
Yeah.
right? 60s was Cold War time. But anyways, so this was, I don't know a whole lot about this period of Chinese history. I would like to learn more, but I never realized
That's
this.
because you're too busy studying the Romans.
It's true. I mean, I can't say enough about the Romans. But yeah, so the four olds. So this was essentially pitting the younger folks against the older folks, right? And so a lot of the older, like, not even that old, but 40s, 50s, 60s, like people were killed, professors, like anybody who was sort of in a position of power or whatever was removed and either killed or put into a camp or whatever. And the young people took over. This was not that Mao was that young, but the young people's revolution.
Yeah.
And
young people were the tool that he used.
Yeah. This was the rhetoric, right, of these old people and the old ideas and customs, whenever they're taking from you. They have kept you down and you need to get rid of them. And I'm not saying that
if you want self-actualization or you want to be the best.
I'm not saying that Trudeau is maybe even knows about this. I wouldn't give him that much credit, but like he's tapping into something that it's not a new idea.
Yeah, pit one against the other.
Yeah, you mentioned Gulag Archipelago, so Russia, 1984, which was fictional, obviously, but a summarization of these ideas.
So like George Orwell's book is a dystopian thing, right? Like it's just painting a picture of like, oh, what if, and then they use kids because they're easy to indoctrinate, right? And usually once they're indoctrinated, they're loyal, right? And their loyalty goes beyond like what you would expect, and then in the book they also use them for informants. So they do surveillance and they rat out their parents, they rat out other people. I don't want to get into the whole book to spoil it for people, but you should read it. I don't know, like it's an interesting one. Anyways, I read that book right after I read the Gulag Archipelago. Oh, okay. You still haven't read that book, but I think I got well, because you talk about the destruction of family bonds, right? When you go through the four stages of the fourth turning and you look at you have stability in the high period, and then as you start to like bring in new ideas and you focus on individualism, you start to break down the family bonds. But pitting young people against old people intensifies that struggle, right, in the family, and it divides, and then you end up with, like, let's say a child who doesn't like his parents, doesn't respect them, in fact might hate them or might vilify them as like, you're the asset holder, you have all the wealth, you would live through a period of great stability, I'm stuck with all of this, I can't afford a house, I can't, no opportunities for me, so I'm a victim, so I need to take what you have and I need to act in my own self-interest. And you're not focused on having a family, you're not focused on any of that, it's just you, right? And if you can have a culture of that, and that's, I don't know if we see Trudeau doing that, but it's just interesting you mentioned that comment about him coming through Generation Squeeze. And
well, but it's part of the same pattern, and this is why like the books like Fourth Turning are useful, because you can identify patterns and trends. And not everything is exactly the same or exactly as written, I guess. But this is a trend of, just you're talking about indoctrination of children, and that just makes me think of our public school system. Yeah,
and that's the flip side to this, is this big trend in homeschooling.
Yeah, yes.
We are going all over the map.
Well, we are, but I mean, it's all tied together. Yeah. It's all part of this period of instability. And you mentioned the indoctrination of children, and we've had that since the 90s. through this, the university, like post-secondary system, and now it's, if you want to call it woke doctrines, have crept down into secondary and now even primary institutions, right? Where kids in kindergarten, grade 1, are learning about different genders, and they're going to drag queen story hour in the library. And like all these it's part of that indoctrination of the young, so you can advance your agenda. When
create loyal subjects. In future years.
And what's happening is now we have this period of instability where people realize this and are fighting back against it. And you have, as you said, a huge homeschool movement, not just in Christian communities, but also non. As people finally got to see, during COVID, they got to see the curriculum. And this was the big moment for a lot of people.
I gotta teach my kids this.
They're like, this is what they're learning.
Well, okay, so this when the state is control of the family and control of the kids and education, whatever. Like it's in 1984 in the Gulag, like it's a picture of a totalitarian state, right? They have control over every aspect, and that's like really pushed in 1984. Is totalitarian, right? It's the authorities, the state is in control over every aspect. Like you don't have any freedom at all, any of your own space. You don't have, you can't even think. So whereas you're talking about people who are looking at the curriculum going, wait a minute, I gotta teach my kid, this is nonsense, like I'm gonna start taking responsibility. You almost have a decentralizing of all of these, like school, right? Maybe that's the first thing. Now all of a sudden, like we talked to Mike about food and healthcare and those sorts of things, right? Like everything, people are starting to kind of question and go, is the state which is tending towards more and more power, more centralization, actually providing what we want and what we need? Or should we take responsibility for these things, and what's our calling? And then,
no, you're right. I was just thinking as you were talking.
Do you do that?
So I had every once in a while.
Usually he's yawning.
Right, with the sexual revolution in the 60s and 70s, well, when you're not promoting sex within marriage and within confines, and I'm not saying that in the 40s it was perfect and everybody just waited till marriage to have sex and have children, but especially in the 60s and 70s, this is when you see the increased demand for abortion as well. Right, and with access to on-demand abortion, there's less reliance on, now I don't need to have a relationship with someone. If I get pregnant, I can just end it. And I don't have to worry about the consequences of raising a child without a father, right? And of fathers not taking responsibility as well, because they're like, just get rid of the baby. Not my problem. Right? And that a huge endemic problem, especially in the States. I just wanted to pull that one up now as well.
More people shirking responsibilities. Giving responsibility over to something else.
Yeah, exactly. So now we're in this sort of post-truth era, right, where there is no truth. The only truth that matters is me and what I think. And, we've talked about all the different implications of that. And just getting back to the UK, for example, right, there are people stepping into that void saying no, we have truth. There is a truth and we want it to be ours. And this is how we want to redefine society. So all over, all over Europe, depending on how you look at it, people have described Europe as under siege, right? And I don't know, it's not a bad when you look at
how much of a backbone does Europe have?
And what's their agenda? What's their point?
If you can't stand on anything, what will you will fall.
But you're starting to see now a backlash. I mean, there has been for a while, but it's growing in popularity. So people will call it a right-wing uprising. It's not right wing. Right, what's right wing and left wing has shifted so far that what used to be center is now right. Is now right wing. So anybody who dares to speak up against something is immediately right wing. But again, that's if you listen to the news. And
have you ever seen a bird trying to fly around with just the left wing?
You also can't fly with just the right wing. You need both wings.
So I think that's the way God designed it, though. Right?
Yeah, exactly. But it all adds up to, this...
I just imagine them inventing airplanes. Be like, no, we should just have a left wing.
Yeah, the Newfies invented the airplane first, right? But they only had one wing, so they just went around and they never got anywhere. In case we hadn't offended everybody, I just had to put Newfoundlanders in there now too.
Going down the list.
But yeah, we're in this period of great instability, right? You've got this assassination attempt on Donald Trump, and
the chaos around understanding what even happened and who's responsible for what and what.
Yeah, it's ridiculous when you if you care to sit down and look at what happened, it's just like unbelievable. So, and I want to say, like, there is this idea that people kind of understand that we're on the verge of something new. Yeah. And that Trump is the savior. And like, I'm just going to tell you, he's not the savior. Yeah. He may usher in a new change and he may do some things, but he's not the savior of anybody or anything, right? Yeah. And, depending on what you believe about politics in the States, there's really a one-party system. Democrats, Republicans, it's all part of the same thing. So
yeah, and that goes back to the money as well. Like we talk about the empires of money, and
even if Trump wants to change things, can he? Will he be able to? Yeah. Can he abolish all the
same thing in Canada with Pierre Poilievre too? There's like some interesting comments he makes, and then it's like, well, could he actually do things that way, or would he fall into the political system and not be able to exercise those?
Yeah, and I mean, it's like you see Giorgia Meloni in Italy, right? She was this right-wing, scary person who got elected on a right-wing platform, and now she's turned out to be much more centrist than
well, where's this was it Argentina guy?
Oh, Javier Milei as well. Yeah, that is still up in the air, but I think
he was going to literally burn down the central bank.
Yeah, exactly. And he hasn't done that yet. No. So what's going
on? Turns out he can print money. Oh,
yeah. Well, I think if you are elected or you come into power, then there's a whole different set of realities that you face. Yeah. And you're like, I can't actually do all this stuff because people won't let me, or it would mean this or that, right? So it's, but yeah, you're seeing a change in many countries. Yeah. In political leanings for sure. And what's going to happen?
So how do we guide people through this a little bit? Like what is, or you got another thing on your list?
Well, just one more thing, which we didn't mention, but that was Bitcoin.
Okay.
Right. And that was a response to a corrupt monetary system. And just another symptom of like the seeds of something being sown for the next sort of high period, right? Yeah. And that's usually how it happens. Every period has the sort of the beginnings of the next period in it, right? Yeah. And what's going to happen. So is Bitcoin going to be like, is everything going to crash? And this is what most Bitcoiners think, or would tell you anyways, is right. Eventually this whole system's going to crash. Yeah. And we're going to be left with like a big old mess, and Bitcoin is going to be the thing that gets us out of that.
Yeah. It's like a monetary salvation story kind of thing. It's weird. Yeah. In some weird way.
You should patent that. Yeah? Bitcoin, a monetary salvation story. It's not a bad idea.
The whole financial system is corrupt.
So,
in the depths of utter depravity.
But that's interesting. You're speaking allegorically, right? Yeah. It's fine to point out all this stuff. It's so easy to do,
right? When you have a Christian perspective and you read the Bible and you understand, sin entered into the world, and now we are sinful. We are corrupt human beings, and this world needs a savior. Okay, that language, there is monetary language in the Bible, and then when you talk about use the Bible language, talking about the monetary system, it nicely overlaps.
Oh, right? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we are indebted. Okay, well, that makes sense because we have a lot of debt. We are eternally indebted.
Well, we understand
that means we can never pay the debt off.
Yeah, we think in monetary terms.
Yeah, tit for tat, right? You did this, I'll do this. Yeah, here you go.
So, it's fine to identify all this and to understand what's happening.
Is this the last episode of the Two Stewards show? This is a culmination of everything.
No, I can find something else to complain about. Yeah. Don't worry about that. But so, what do you do? Yeah. Right? We are real estate investors. Should we still invest in real estate if we know that in 10 years we may be looking at a radically different world? Right? What do you think, Brent?
If I'm looking at a radically different world in 10 years, I do want to look at it from the context of a house that I live in.
So you want to look at it from your window?
Yeah, from my window. As opposed to looking at the rubble from the grass in front of it.
Yeah.
But
So yeah,
property
let's,
rights.
Let's start out sort of on an earthly level,
Earthly,
right?
okay.
Which is looking at real estate. Is it
Yeah.
still something to look at? And I think it is,
Yeah.
because barring an extreme change like the Cultural Revolution in China, for example, right? If you were a landowner, or even the Bolshevik Revolution in
Yeah.
Russia, if you're a landowner, you probably either lost your life or lost your land.
Yeah.
So if that happens,
Which there's
nothing
arguments
is-
about that, because if you look at the recent talk about having capital gains tax on your primary
Yeah.
residence, and pitting young people against old people because young people can't afford a house. Well,
Yep.
that is putting people who own assets or own real estate as bad people.
Yes.
We kind of expect that. I don't know, but
Yeah, because we're so socialist.
pardon.
Excuse me, because we're so socialist, we can understand that.
Yeah, this is old news for America.
Seen it many times, Brent.
Yeah.
No, but I think real estate will hold, like land has always held its value through all of these periods.
Yeah.
Now, who owns the land? Okay, that's a different
Yeah.
question.
How
But
secure is your property right?
yeah,
Like, do you actually own it?
but if
Yeah.
I think if we get to the point where property rights are no longer guaranteed or secure,
We got other
then
problems.
everything's up and like your life is at
It's
stake here at
chaos,
that
yeah.
point. So everything that you've done to prepare,
Yeah.
like, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
With the exception of, shout out to all the preppers here, but survival skills, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe you need to learn how to use a weapon or self-defense and how to grow crops and things.
Do you know how to do any of those things?
No, nothing. Nothing. I can grow basil.
Yeah.
I can
Well,
do
just
that.
think about it. Like, if you own a piece of real estate and all of a sudden things go chaotic, well, what if you owned, let's say, stock portfolio, and the bank's closed and the company
Yeah.
is it's the same. It's going to be chaos. It's going to be chaos. Well,
I think you're
real
much
estate
more
is tangible.
likely. Yeah, real estate's tangible. If you hold stocks, I think you're much more likely to have that wiped out. And
Yeah.
we've seen that multiple times, right?
Yeah.
The last period of instability, 1929, people lost everything.
Yeah.
Many people
Even
did.
in the beginning of this kind of unraveling or whatever, like or the beginning of the crisis period in 2008 with the great financial crisis, a lot of
Yeah.
people lost a lot of stuff.
Well, the government stepped in, so not a lot of people lost.
With a big Band-Aid.
Yeah, very big.
You got to
Band-Aids.
become a Band-Aid supplier in this world.
But if you think of the people who made it through even 1920, like the Depression and stuff, right?
Yeah, I can't
Like,
remember.
you think of the
but maybe-
Rockefellers and whoever, like people who had stuff, had land, they had oil,
Yeah.
they had holdings of different kinds, right? That weren't affected by,
Yeah.
and a lot of them actually became wealthier,
Yeah.
concentrated power during this period because they were able to access money and buy things at reduced prices.
Yeah.
And so maybe you'll see the same. But I think that land, that real estate will still be valuable going forward,
Yeah.
right? Unless we have a complete, like I said, revolution where...
Yeah. Or if we all end up in some digital world where we just sit here and we're in the digital world now, Hey,
Well,
anyways.
you're still going to need to sit somewhere,
Yeah.
right? And with the amount of people coming here, they all need a spot to sit,
Yeah.
at the very least.
All right, so that's the earthly
that's-
level. What else?
Well, there's also on an earthly level, like hard currency,
Yeah.
right? So we've talked about gold and Bitcoin. You can make an argument for both, but I think Bitcoin is much a superior asset.
I think this comes before real estate almost, right? Because everybody uses money because everybody has to store the value of their time and labor into the future, and that's the most liquid thing they can choose. Like, you're not just gonna buy a piece of real estate. Like, not everybody.
Well, if you save up 10 grand, you can't just put that in real estate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
fair enough.
Everyone on every kind of piece of the scale can get a fraction of the monetary system, right? Provided you can move around and actually function. But
yeah.
So that's maybe like the base level is money.
Okay.
So if you look at that, what option are you choosing as the store of your value? Just on a daily basis, like, is it Canadian dollars, is it US dollars? And we had Glenn on last time, right? And he was talking about, well, hey, I made a decision in my life to choose Canadian and US on two different loans. And by the way, at the end of the loan, the dollar had shifted, and now all of a sudden, like, this one way outperformed the other one. So that's the sort of thing we have to deal with as well, right?
Yeah, and if you believe there's a crash coming, like, is it going to happen in Canada first? I think so. So then do you want Canadian dollars? No, you want US dollars. But then we look at the US situation, it's not a lot better.
Yeah, no.
Like, it'll be the last one to fall, maybe. But, people talk about de-dollarization and the rise of other
But the last one to
other
fall falls
countries.
the hardest, is that?
Yeah, possibly.
Yeah.
Possibly. So, at that point, what do? You can have gold, but if you remember, you don't remember, Brent,
Yeah.
but
The Spanish galleons.
FDR suspended gold convertibility, right? Way back when, where basically you could not own more than, like, I don't remember what it was, an ounce of gold or something, right?
Yeah.
You could have
Like
some
you have a wedding
jewelry and
ring
gold.
and-
Yeah.
yeah.
But other than that, you had to legally give up your gold to the government.
Yeah.
You could not hold it. And they could forcibly come take it. A lot of people didn't do that and they
Yeah.
held it, but a lot of
Yeah.
people did turn it in as well. So
Yeah.
with something like that, they can take it from you.
It's physical. It's tangible.
Yeah. And then, let's say you want to go sell your gold somewhere. Well, then maybe you can't sell it because with the institution you're going to is like, you're not supposed to
It's
have
illegal.
this. We can't take it. Yeah. And
So
they'll
now you're on
report
the
you.
black market.
Yeah. Which is never good. So that's the advantage to Bitcoin, right? Is that the government can't
It's
take it
decentralized.
from you.
Yeah.
They could throw you in prison and make you give it up, I suppose.
Yeah.
How likely is that? I don't think so. But it's something that essentially they cannot take from you. So
Yeah.
I think that's the argument for holding Bitcoin. Maybe not 100% of your net worth in Bitcoin. I don't think that's wise either. But some of it,
Yeah,
right?
do we have listeners who have done that? But 100% of their network? Hopefully not.
I don't know. Having a business as well, I don't know where you would stick that in the scheme of things.
I guess I would, if everything, man, we're talking about everything falling apart here, and this is kind of crazy. But anyway, so if you talk about breaking it down to, okay, like things are getting out of hand.
Well, even just making it through a period of crisis. It doesn't have to mean the
I think
apocalypse.
you can root a business down to adding value to other human beings, right? Like that's what a business is you creating systems to add value to other people.
I do that through puns, by the way.
Yeah. Okay.
But
Well, you
it's
don't
not a
get paid.
business.
Yeah, but maybe you add puns in the podcast so that eventually you'll get a customer, and then the customer will,
Maybe, okay.
show the value of your puns by, But anyways, yeah. So if you add value to people, you can endure a period of crisis by continuing to do that and expect some, financial benefit out of it, I guess.
Yeah. So, yeah, I just wanted to throw that out because we've talked about that as well,
So
having a business,
maybe
right?
church and family are two other big ones that we should talk about.
Yeah, so the next one, which is sort of, it's on the earthly scale, but it's passing over, I think, into the spiritual, right? Invest in family is what I got written down here. So, sorry,
That's contrary to this fourth phase thing. It's almost like you see the phase starts out with a stable family, and then it goes towards this individual pursuit of, self-actualization and not. It's away from the family, right? And then you have this crisis where everything's in shambles. It's chaos, and no one values children. No one values family relationships. No one sits down and eats dinner together with their kids. No one cares for their kids' education, like whatever, right? And then eventually, you have a rebirth. And now we're talking about investing in family as...
Yeah, you have literal rebirth.
Literal birth.
Well, I mean, if you...
We're getting to the rebirth.
birth and then, no rebirth.
Spiritual
You don't
rebirth.
want to do that again. But no, if you think, you can make a lot of arguments for family, right? So if you're not completely individualistic, because people are like, I don't like that, it's not for me, or whatever. Okay, fine. But if you want to come through a period of crisis, like just on a personal level, I'd rather have a larger family that we can all support each other.
Yeah.
Right? That's even from just a self-interest point of view.
Yeah.
So from that point of view, it's good. From the point of view of society, you want families to rebuild society. Our culture, also our society, was built on the idea of families, right? And then if you look at our churches are made strong by strong families, not by lots of individuals, but families are the building block of the church.
And that's God's design, right?
Yeah, that's how he designed. Yeah, that's how he designed humanity. So every strong culture has strong families.
Yeah, because we mimic what the order God created for things, right?
Yeah, exactly. And you can, like, you just think of the benefits of families, right? And we're taking the ideal, not every family is ideal, but where you have a mother and a father who love their kids and treat them well, and they grow up and they're productive members of society that can get along with other people and understand how to get along. Like, that's a picture of a good building block of society. And if you're coming through a crisis period, that's something you want, is a stable structure upon which to build your country, your society, whatever, right? But it's, for us, this is also a faith matter, right?
Yeah.
Where we believe this is how God created us. This is a creation ordinance. Be fruitful and multiply, man and woman together.
Yeah.
All these things come together. So we're obeying God.
Well, you
when
talk
we
in the
do
Bible,
this.
it's an institution. Like, God instituted marriage. It's, people say, oh, like, you're not, following the institution of marriage. Yeah, well, it's God who instituted it in a certain way. And we follow that, and then it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and it's not because we had this great idea, like, hey, we should, like, this is, God told us, and we realized the benefits.
It's funny because, so in the fourth turning, the crisis phase, they talk about, social reorganization, and all of these, it's a time when people are re-examining the norms and values.
Yeah.
And they're going, I think that's kind of started with COVID too. Like, people started asking more questions and learning. Like, that's when we started this podcast, and people started, we talk about homeschooling. Okay, they're looking into that as an option, and then they're looking into all these things, and they're re-examining. And what's funny, when you re-examine, like, you seek the truth.
Yeah.
And where's the truth found? Well, in the Bible, right? So it's like you always end up going back to this. People say, oh, like, we abandon God and then we come back to Him, whatever. But it's almost a way. Like, if you actually go out and seek the truth, you will find it, right? Like, it's right there. Seek and you will find it.
But you have to look for it.
Yeah, you have to seek. And usually people don't seek, don't take that action until there's pain, right? And that's where these cycles come in, because you almost get lulled into sleep. And then, oh, by the way, you can't afford anything. They're coming for you. Like, this is going to blow up, and that's like, and everybody's turning against you. Oh, maybe I should look for the truth. Oh, God has the truth right here the whole time. I just abandoned it. Oh, and here it is. Oh, why don't we just do what it says? Like, oh, things are great. Now let's just totally abandon it again.
Well, I mean, that is the story of
I'm
Israel
happy to be
in
alive,
the Old Testament,
Mark. I don't know.
right?
Yeah.
Just time and again.
Judges.
Just continual cycles.
And it's
like
an
this.
example for us, and it's just a picture of our lives, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, the ultimate answer
You
is
just got saved from slavery, and now you're complaining because you don't have food. It's like, what are you guys thinking? But we're the exact same way.
Yeah. We are saved, and then we put our faith in other idols,
Yeah.
right? We look for,
It's so
immediately
easy to do.
we look for a golden calf to worship. But I mean, that, again, we talked in the beginning about the levels of depression, anxiety, frustration with everything, right? Because even if you look at this and you make all the necessary preparations, and you have real estate and Bitcoin and a strong family and a business, and we come through the crisis period and we're stronger on the other side, like, this is going to happen again.
Yeah.
In 80 to 120 years, your children maybe, or your grandchildren, are going to go through this same depressing thing, and society is going to go through this same cycle.
Yeah. And then you almost have these
And
two
it's like-
forces where, like, the one group of people is like, it won't happen. It's not a slippery slope. And the other guy's like, oh, it's a slippery slope. We can't do anything fun because whatever. And you get this battle throughout history of those two political viewpoints. And then eventually it just happens again, right? Like,
But that can be depressing to know that, well, we got through this. It's going to happen again. Like, great. And then, the future of humanity is bleak. Like, everything's terrible, right?
So that gets us to the real truth. Like,
the
spiritual dimension to this, the actual eternal dimension, which is, what we're trying to focus on our podcast as well. From a Christian perspective, having an eternal view, where do we invest?
Yeah, exactly. And, where is our comfort? Right? The only comfort we have is that Christ has us.
Yeah.
He's our only comfort in life and death, right? That what happens here isn't really that important.
Yeah.
It's important. It feels important for us now, but in the context of eternity,
we need to be spending more time thinking of things of greater consequence.
Yeah.
Like, what is the eternal consequence to you buying Bitcoin or not buying? Like, at the end of the day, it doesn't save you, right? Eternal perspective. So that's Bitcoin. You can think of a list of all different things, right?
Yeah.
Whatever you're pursuing in your life. Is it eternal consequence, what you're pursuing?
And how are you praising God with what you have? Are you being a good steward with the things that he gives you for now? Because this is just like, I don't know, trial run, maybe. I don't know if that's the best way to put it, but we're like, it's like the parable of the stewards, where God gives us stuff and sees what we're going to do. Now, fortunately, we're not ultimately judged on what we do, because we would all fail.
Yeah.
And Jesus came to save us. We just have to believe in him, and then we will have eternal life. So even if we do screw up in this life, and
even if
okay, when we do,
it's like this podcast. The whole thing is screwing up.
It's a mess. But we know that there is redemption.
Yeah.
Right. So what do you do with that Bitcoin and with that? Do you just use it for yourself and your family? Like that's not the answer. That's no
it's
good.
A way of opting out, man.
Yeah, exactly. We have to opt in.
Yeah.
Right. To tell other people about Jesus. You can't, if you opt out, you're not talking to anybody else. You're not in society. You're not in culture, and you can't influence them.
Yeah.
And you have to be responsible, be a good steward, take care of your family first, and then others. You just read about that.
But so then stewardship is just an acknowledgement of the fact that all the things you have are gifts, right?
If I ever get a boat, by the way, I'm going to name it Stewardship. I don't know if that'll be the best use of my resources, but anyways, yes, it's a...
When he's not yawning or thinking of puns, he does have something good to say.
Ultimately it all comes from God.
Yeah.
And
if you don't acknowledge that, right, it becomes about the things of this world, and it is bleak. Like if you look at these news stories and you read the fourth turning and you go through these cycles, like it's mundane, it's repetitive, it's endless. What does Ecclesiastes say? It's meaningless, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing new under the sun. Like, don't expect that all of a sudden Trump is the savior and Bitcoin is the way out. Like, no, it's not the case, right? They're great things that God has given us, or they may be, right? And we need to steward them as that, right? Like God's given this, okay, how do I use it? But for his glory. And that's where I think if you don't ask that question, like, how can I use this for God's glory? Yeah, well, it's for my good. Well, who cares about your good? Like, eternally speaking, who cares about where you are?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So. Ultimately that's the answer, right? How can we be optimistic in the face of everything that's going on in this world, right? The further you look, right, you see layer upon layer upon layer of intrigue and deception and shadowy empires and corruption, like everywhere you turn, right?
Yeah.
You
the
just
truth
can't
is twisted. It's
help
evil.
but be depressed.
Yeah.
And
the message of like turn inside yourself and find out what your truth is. And that doesn't work either, right? Like.
Well, that's kind of Nietzsche, right? I've looked into the abyss, and the abyss looked back into me, like right? When you turn to yourself, you're just looking into a giant abyss, a giant hole of nothingness. Yeah. And, no wonder you're depressed.
On that note.
So, I don't know if I think it's a message we need to hear time and again, just as Christians, because we get wrapped up in our worldly pursuits, right? But also for people who don't know Jesus, who haven't heard this message before, like that's the most important, if you're listening today, that's the most important thing we can tell you, the most important thing you can hear, because this has more import for your life, for your eternal consequence than anything else that you can do. And, if you do nothing else in your life but acknowledge Jesus, then you're good, and you can be happy, and you can be optimistic.
Yeah, no, I think a good approach maybe is on this show is just to leave it at that and let people who are seeking truth go and find it. Like, read the Bible for yourself.
Yeah.
Right. Like, we're not going to tell you all the answers, but like, we'll tell you the things that we know from our perspectives. But, you know, if you've gone down the Bitcoin rabbit hole of real estate, like, you're into podcasts, you're reading, like, do the same thing with God's word. And like, this will all come together.
Yeah, like follow your search for the truth to its natural conclusion.
Yeah.
And that's where you'll end up. So, okay, well, thanks for listening, folks.
Hey, that was a more positive ending, I think.
Yeah,
Right?
finally we got there. So, yeah, till next time.
Steward your wealth wisely. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Two Stewards Show. If you like my voice better, click subscribe.
And if you like my voice better, click share.
If you like both, give us a 5-star rating.
To interact with the show, feel free to reach out at hello@goodstewards.ca.
We'll see you in the next episode. In the meantime, steward your wealth wisely.